All right, let's see if this is going to work. I made a video the other day and couldn't upload it. So now I'm just going to talk over my video that I made because I can't re-record noise. Anyway, today we're going to take a look at solving polynomial equations by factoring. First step, move all terms to one side and set the equation equal to 0. Step 2, factor the polynomial completely using all methods of factoring. And then we set each piece equal to 0 and solve. Once you have factored down to a quadratic, you can solve using different methods. Most commonly we'll use quadratic formula, but if there is no b value, you can solve by square roots. Okay? When we factor, first thing we always look for, greatest common factor. Then we have to make sure our polynomial is set equal to 0. As we look at number 1, I do not have a greatest common factor. I see two terms with a plus, so the only possibility is the sum of cubes. Can you cube something to get x cubed? Yes. Can we cube something to get 125? Yes. So this x and the 5 are what we use to plug into our sum of cubes formula. This comes from what we learned in the previous lesson. When we factor a sum of cubes or a difference of cubes, my two factors are a binomial and a trinomial. I use the acronym SOAP to think about my signs. The S is same, opposite, and always positive. My first factor is the x plus 5. Next factor is that first highlight squared, so x squared. To get my middle term, I multiply the x and the 5 together. And then to get my last term, I square the other piece. I square 5 to get 25. I have factored it completely. I have two factors whose product is 0. I am multiplying two things together whose product is 0. So that means one of them needs to be 0. So I need to find my magic numbers. I encourage you to draw this line as we do the factors. The first piece, what plus 5 is equal to 0? X equals 5. The other piece, I can't solve it. I can't factor it further. It's a quadratic, so now we think back to last unit. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what makes that equal to 0. I can't factor it further. I can't do square root method because I have a b term. I can't complete the square because my b term is odd. So I need to use the quadratic formula for that. You are going to be using the quadratic formula a lot. So I plug that in. Why don't you hit pause, complete that problem using quadratic formula, and then come back and check. So you should have ended up with negative 75 underneath your radical. And then we simplify that. First of all, can't have a negative, so that's going to come out and have an I. What perfect square is 75 divisible by? 25. And the square root of 25 is 5. So we have 5i square root 3. And then I have to ask myself, can I simplify that even further? Are 5, 5, and 2 all divisible by anything? They are not. So I'm just going to write my answer out. 5 plus or minus 5i square root 3 all over 2. So I have 3 solutions. X equals 5. And then with my plus or minus, those are my other 2 solutions. And so this is what we're going to do a lot of in this lesson. Okay. The first few on this page are sum and difference of cubes. As we take a look at number 2, I got to first set it equal to 0. And then when we factor, I first have to look for my greatest common factor. I can factor an x squared out of both of them. My x squared on the outside I'm done with. Now I can take a look at my 8x cubed plus 1 and factor that further. I see 2 terms separated by a plus, which means a sum of cubes. So I ask myself, what do I cube to get 8x cubed? Okay, looks like we're going to pause, finish that out. If you haven't paused yet, pause, and then come back and we will check our answer. When you factor it down, you have the x squared on the outside, 2x plus 1, and then 4x squared plus 2x. Oops, should be a minus. Forgot soap. And then that's a plus. So once we've factored it on the outside, the x squared, I'm trying to figure out what squared is equal to 0. That is 0. My next factor, I set 2x plus 1 equal to 0. I have to subtract the 1 and divide both sides by 2. X equals negative 1/2. And then for that last piece, let's use the quadratic formula. Pause, come back. Here's our answer, 1 plus or minus I square root of 3 all over 4. Next one, it is set equal to 0. So let's pause, work it, and then come back. There we go. All right, here's our last one. Again, you can always pause at any time. Work through these, check them. They are a lot of repetition. Okay, this first page involved sum and difference of cubes. The next page, they are a little bit different. Now we look at number 5. I do not have a GCF. It is a trinomial. X to the 4th and x squared. There are 3 terms. My a value is 1. So I just need to find 2 numbers that multiply together to get negative 42 and add to get positive 1. Those numbers will be 7 and negative 6. Out in front, I'm going to have x squared with each of them. Now I've gotten each of my factors down to quadratics. Notice x squared plus 7 equals 0. I don't have a b term, so I can just solve using square roots. So I can subtract 7 from both sides. So x squared equals negative 7. I get rid of the squared by square rooting. Don't forget the plus or minus. Do not owe Miss K $1. So then I have x equals plus or minus. The negative comes out as an I, and then I can't do anything to simplify the square root of 7. So it just says plus or minus I square root 7. On the flip side, I've got x squared minus 6 equal to 0. Again, I can solve using square roots. Add 6 to both sides. Take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. Nothing you can do with the square root of 6, so it's just going to say plus or minus square root of 6. All right, on this page, the next 2 are similar to that one. The last one is 4 terms in grouping. Okay. If you want to just pause right now, finish those last 3, or just pause and do the next one. X equals 0, x equals plus or minus 2 square root 2, and x equals plus or minus I square root 3. Copying these down without actually doing them will not help you. So please work them out on your own. All right. Number 6, a little bit different. I still got to bring my 16 over and set it equal to 0. But, oops. My a value was greater than 1, so I had to multiply the 3 and the negative 16 together. If you haven't done that yet, hit pause. Don't look at the answer. Work it, then come back. Once you've factored it by grouping, you are left with x squared plus 2, 3x squared minus 8. Trick on this one, on the right-hand side here, this 3x squared minus 8. When you square rooted both sides, you had plus or minus the square root of 8 over the square root of 3. The math gods do not allow a square root in the denominator. So we have to rationalize that. We have talked about that a little bit, not a whole lot. So maybe hit pause, take a look at what I did there. Let that sink in. When you go to do the last one, 4 terms, grouping. So hit pause, work through the last one, and come back. For the very last one, x equals plus or minus 5. It's 5. Sorry, plus or